I'll just start this off by the same way that I do every time. Everything you're going to see in these next half hour or so is from the previous week. All these videos are between now and our last show. So we're bringing you what is happening on the ground, and we'll take a look at these maps. And I think Nora did a great job showing, of course, like she always does to begin the show, recording the news of what's going on, and to just really distinguish the fact that the airstrikes and the death and destruction does not match the battlefield alone. Nora talked about the civilian police chiefs killed in Mawasi. If we zoom in, we can zoom in onto this next map, and you can see Mawasi is there between Deir al-Balah and Khan Yunis. It's along the coast there, and that's where the massacre that was claimed to be targeting the civilian police chief, but killed children and burned tents. There's no resistance in that area. That's not who is being targeted when we see these tent massacres. So just to understand that and to see that on the map of what we're talking about, it's the area in front of Khan Yunis all along the sea, and it's sand dunes. It's not a livable area. There's not roads. There's not proper sanitation or sewage or all the things that Chris talked about that need to be. Mawasi doesn't have that. Mawasi wasn't previously a fully stocked city. It was a tiny little area that was trapped around the 𝐓𝐿 settlement, an Israeli settlement that ran all the way in front of Khan Yunis. Anyone growing up in Khan Yunis could see the sea, but they couldn't access it because 𝐓𝐿 was a settlement that ran along in front of Khan Yunis. And Al Mawasi was a tiny area in that that was surrounded by that settlement. It didn't have infrastructure. It didn't have roads, proper roads. It didn't have proper any kind of infrastructure, buildings that could be converted, schools that could become shelters. Mawasi doesn't have any of that. And that is what, when we talk about Mawasi, we're talking about people living on sand dunes on the edge of the Mediterranean Sea in the winter. And the flooding in Gaza is catastrophic when people were living in homes. The de-development of the Gaza Strip has been a principal objective of Israel's for 2 generations. And it's effective. And when the rains come, what we're seeing right now, it's devastating. The flooding is devastating. And so the safe area is a dangerous area. The safe zone of Mawasi is a dangerous area. Because of Israel's attacks on civilians. And I just want to distinguish that from the resistance, because the civilians are not being killed around the resistance fighting. The civilians are being killed in areas that the resistance is not operating in. And that is the Israeli army writ large. And I just want to bring, I've been doing updates on the prisoner exchange and ceasefire talks that came out, a little more news on them. Still not, I don't think there's anything serious about this, but since I've been bringing them up to date, and the Mossad chief went to Qatar for talks. They're at least moving in a way that they weren't before. Apparently, Hamas is asking for clear demands, a clear commitment about Israeli withdrawal from the Philadelphia corridor, which you're looking at there on the map, and the Netzarim corridor, that is, quote, backed by maps and rigid timetables. They don't want just some general idea that in the future, some point, they want maps and timetables for that. Hamas wants a clear agreement on the criteria for releasing thousands of Palestinian prisoners, not just vague gestures towards that. And of course, the biggest problem of these these prisoner exchanges, is that nobody trusts Israel to follow through on their side of the deal. So what Israel wants from Hamas is a complete and detailed list of all the hostages. But we know since November of last year, the prisoner exchange, that Hamas is not holding all of the prisoners. Hamas has asked for a ceasefire to allow them time to find the other prisoners that are being held, the other captives that are being held by other groups, smaller groups, some criminal groups, some individuals. The hostages, the captives are not held by Qassam. This is not something that Hamas can agree to in this position because they don't hold a certain number of them. So that has been the position of Hamas since the beginning, is that they need a week plus to find people and to safely do that without Israel flying overflight when they're going out and looking for them. And in November of last year, Israel said, we're not going to do that and return to war. So this is all on Israel that this hasn't happened. At now. And of course, Israel wants a partial deal. They want to try to get as many people back as they can before they go back to war. And so this is, again, a ceasefire that doesn't mean ceasefire. It's emptied of all of its meanings. But interestingly, I have a quote here. Salah Aruri, who was assassinated 1 year ago in Beirut, he is a Qassam founder and the West Bank chief. He did an interview. He was also the chief negotiator of the Shalit exchange, the Israeli tank gunner who was captured in a tunnel operation in 2006 on the border. Actually, right there on that map, you can look. It was just north of Khan Yunis, where he was captured. And he was exchanged for 1,100 Palestinians, including Yahya Sinwar. And he did an interview in 2017, so almost a decade ago, on Israeli, but also 6 years after the Shalit exchange. And in 2017, he said on the Israeli state broadcaster, Khan Channel 11, he said, "This is one of Israel's society's strong points, and I say this to everyone, that the country is willing to go to war over one soldier and free 1,000 prisoners for one soldier. That is something positive. As someone on the enemy side, it would be better for me. I'd be happy if Israel reached the point where the soldier or civilian doesn't interest it anymore. That would weaken its society. It would undermine its army, and it would undermine the entire Israeli society." So, interesting quote from Salah Aruri, his assassination in Beirut 1 year ago. We covered that he was a senior most Qassam leader, and he was in Beirut. He was a strong connection with Nasrallah. Um, and that's an interesting quote, that the Israel who would exchange 1,000 prisoners for one is a stronger state than the state that abandons their prisoners. And that's 8 years before Operation, 6 years before Operation Al Aqsa Flood. Um, yeah, so let's look at number 3, because there's some operations here. Sarah Quds mortar operation here against the Philadelphia corridor. The fighter says, "We remain steadfast, patient, and committed to the cause of Palestine. We do not tire defending it. We remember the blood of our martyrs who paved this path, and we pledge to continue on this path, martyrdom or victory." This operation is firing on the Israelis and capturing drones. And interesting, you can see the 2 cameras there on that drone. Take note of, though, the 2 eyes at the top, and then the camera tilted down. That's a Mavic. This G, it's a Chinese company, DJI, that sells these drones, and these are a principal. They're the main innovation of this war from the Israeli perspective is the use of these drones tactically to case buildings and to see what's inside a building before you go in on a small unit level. They all have them. The soldiers all carry them, like literally individual soldiers carrying them, and they use them a lot. So it's kind of remarkable to see this. First of all, interesting that they're firing on the Philadelphia corridor in the same way that we'll see coming up, and we have seen over the last 15 months, that they fire on the Netzarim corridor. So now these operations are settling in here. This week gave us a bit more time to cover some of these artillery units that we don't usually get a chance to cover because there's so much information. But you can see that drone. It's essentially a commercial drone. You could buy that off the shelf. And if you look at the next slide here, number 4, Tamara, you can see this Qassam captured in Rafah there's a quite a bounty here. You can look on the table. There's half a dozen of these, but these are makeshift drones. And you're going to watch, he pulls off the battery here and shows you. What he reveals to you is that these batteries, that these drones are put together by Flotilla 13 veterans organizations. You can see there's half a dozen of them. They're not the G drones. The Avata and the Mavic are the two key drones. These are makeshift drones, homemade drones. There you can see, and he lifts the battery off. You can see the battery is strapped on. So a lot of people over these months have been asking me for clues that the Palestinians are running out of weapons. And then this popped up in my feed, and this is a clue: the Israelis are running out of weapons. These are makeshift drones supplied by Flotilla 13, which is like their Navy SEALs, the Israeli Navy SEALs. And you look at them, they're just pieced together. They look like essentially racing drones. They don't have the tilted cameras in the way that that previous drone that Soraya captured had. You can see them on there. They need a brick battery strapped on by Velcro, and they're provided by this Flotilla 13 veterans organizations. So what's going on here? We'll have to follow this, but it sure looks to me like the Israelis are running out of drones. Um, yeah, so I just wanted to bring that to you because these drones have been a critical part of Israel's war fighting. And what we're seeing here is slapdash. There's no advantage to these drones we're looking at here. And obviously they're capturable because we're seeing a half a dozen of them there. So interesting note from the Philadelphia corridor and Israel's drone program. We'll look at number 5. We'll go up to the Netzarim corridor, which is again, still consistently targeted. I detailed the Netzarim corridor on last week's show. So if people want more in depth on the corridor, you can go back and check out last week's resistance report. But on this one, we're going to just show you a number of operations against the corridor. Number 6, you have the PFLP Abu Ali Mustafa brigades targeting the Netzarim corridor in a joint operation with the Ansar brigades. Again, these are joint operations rooms, operations where the units combine together. Do we have number 6? So we have 107 millimeter rocket artillery here, and you can see the Ansar brigades and the Abu Ali Mustafa brigades of the PFLP both putting their headbands on their rockets and rocket artillery. And you can see that these could be launched from multiple launch rocket systems, but these guys can fire these just as effectively from the ground. They don't require what Israel brags about knocking out when they say they knocked out a rocket launcher, like they did in Lebanon, saying they knocked out rocket launchers. This weapon, to have it fired from, as long as you have the angles right, he's putting the fuse on here, as long as you have the artillery math, as they call it, the trigonometry, I guess it is, as long as you have that right, you get the distance, the angle, the trajectory. Firing it out of a hole in the ground is just as effective as firing it off a launcher. So we're seeing that happen, and you're seeing the Palestinians firing these without launchers on the same day. There was a lot of year-end stuff, and the Stockholm Institute for International Peace Research released a report saying that there had been $22 billion in weapons given to Israel since October 7th, which roughly matches what the Brown University Cost of War Project said. They said 23 billion recently, 22, 23 billion. We saw this week another 8 billion provided, and you see the resistance here firing from dugout holes. And it's an effective tool, but it just shows you that the resistance is not going to not only not going to surrender, but just because they lose a part of their weapons systems, it doesn't mean that that weapon system is then not used. They're just as effective. In fact, in some ways, they're more effective because they don't attract counterfire in the same way as having a battery, having a massive launcher system that could be seen and then tracked, and then the launcher gets blown up. And these guys are setting those fuses, and they're setting them on a timer, and they're gone. So even if there is counter battery fire, these guys are out of there. The Abu Ali Mustafa brigades, that was what was written on the rockets on that 107 millimeter rocket artillery, but the fighter says in the background, the audio we took out, he says the Abu Ali Mustafa Brigade's rocket unit targets the command and control of the Israeli military in the Netzarim corridor in response to their crimes against civilians in Gaza and our brotherly Yemen on December 30. So shout out to Yemen from the PFLP and the Ansar brigades in the Netzarim corridor. Number 8, is this 7? This is 7. Yeah. So this is where you can see written on the shells, the PFLP fighter with his one finger up. The Marxists still giving a shout out to the one. Using a piece of a roof here again, the destruction, using the destruction to their advantage. That's a piece of corrugated metal roof, the kind of roof that defines the refugee camps that have been blown up. And as long as you get the angle right, and you can see he's got his necessary devices for checking the angle, that's a perfectly good launcher. So ingenuity under very, very difficult circumstances. These are being fired from either side of the Netzarim corridor, both of them completely destroyed, supposedly under Israeli control. But these guys put lie to that all the time. And so that's the Abu Ali Mustafa brigades. And number 8 is 𝐓𝐴 𝐄𝐿 and the Al-Aqsa Martyrs brigades. You can see their artillery tools there. And these are mortars. They're often Israeli mortars, captured Israeli mortars, but 𝐓𝐴𝐿 and Soraya both make their own 60 millimeter mortars. So that's what you're seeing here. There's the math. They're doing the geometry there, and the trigonometry, I guess. And those are attaching fuses to the end. And then you can see the arc of that is just a direct line. So they're just firing these very effective weapons directly on the command and control positions. So we don't get to show you these very often because there's always so much material to show. There hasn't been as much broadcast material over the last few weeks as usual. So it gives us an opportunity to show you what these guys do, because we haven't given enough attention to the artillery units. These guys are out here every day. No matter the circumstances, there's at least a dozen of these operations against the Netzarim corridor every single week. And we just don't fit them into the resistance report because, well, for one reason, because the frontline fighting gives camera work right up in the hits. When you're seeing Yasin strikes, you're seeing it from a camera right in front of the tank, whereas these are launched from a distance. And so it's harder to see because of the width of the corridor. It's harder to have a camera on where they land, but they land, and they're fragmentation warheads. They fire shrapnel out, and these kind of rocket attacks are what forced the Israelis to leave the Gaza Strip in the first place. So when people are talking about settlements in Gaza, just remember that these guys firing on these military positions in the Netzarim corridor, they would fire on the construction of any settlements in Gaza. So you can't, you have to keep that in mind when you're saying the goal for the Israelis is settlement in Gaza. It's not. It's unclear what their goal is other than destruction. And I think if we look at this map of northern Gaza, we can see to set up the battle in northern Gaza. Yeah, number 10. The Israelis are operating and have been now. This marks the 90. This week marked Monday marked the 90th consecutive day of the siege of Jabaliya. That battle and Kamal Adwan Hospital. Kamal Adwan Hospital is technically in Beit Lahia. A lot of people saying it was in Jabaliya, but the reason why is because it's a contiguous strip of land from Beit Lahia through Jabaliya camp, through Jabaliya, and into Gaza City. Tufa and Daraj and Shujaiya are Gaza City. They're just neighborhoods of Gaza City. The beach camp is the refugee camp right along the water. Tel El Hawa is the downtown core of Gaza City. So you have contiguous land, contiguous buildings all the way from Beit Lahia all the way to Gaza City. So this 3-month siege of Jabaliya is actually not of Jabaliya. It's of Beit Lahia so far. They've only been able to erase Beit Lahia, and they're now just this week began moving in on Beit Hanoun. And Yeah, they've doubled the pace of the airstrikes in Gaza. I think that that matches the ceasefire talks, putting additional pressure on. Because this week they doubled over previous days the number of airstrikes up to 100, and that is their principal method for destroying in Gaza, in the north in particular, is airstrikes. But that's only one of their four principal ways, because they use tank shelling. And field guns. They use anti tank mines, which we've talked about a lot over these last 15 months, where they literally rig up a house with anti tank mines and blow it up. There's been a number of operations where the resistance has attacked those people carrying those mines or in buildings with those mines, and created mass casualty events. One of the things that we're seeing in Beit Hanoun, and in Beit Lahia, is the actual physical using of the bulldozers to drop buildings. Their goal is just to drop all the buildings that they can. Actually, there's a fifth way they do it, and that's new to this war, which is the truck bomb. The M113 Zelda is used. Elbit has an attachment for it to make it unmanned, remotely operated, and they fill up that troop carrier with explosives and drive it in and use it as a car bomb or a truck bomb or a tank bomb. So those have been the principal uses, the five main ways that they destroy in Gaza. And the Israeli Air Force announced that they had carried out 1,400 airstrikes in Gaza in December alone. And the number for the war overall is now over 50,000. And if we look at 11A here, Tamara, if we can, this is Haaretz allowed one of its journalists, the IDF allowed Haaretz, one of its journalists, into Gaza, and he went on an embed and produced this story. In Gaza's Jabaliya, devastation seems to be the IDF's end goal, not the hostages return. And the article is interesting because, I mean, it's a horrific article because he's describing what he looks at, which you can see on the right there. If you go to the next slide, Tamara, that's the full screen of that photo, or maybe one back. There's a full screen. Yeah, there you go. The full screen of that photograph for that article just shows you the criminal level of destruction. And they bragged about how all 4,500 buildings in Jabaliya camp had been knocked down. This is the third major invasion of Jabaliya. The one in May wiped out half of the southern edge of the camp. And then the one in November till the end of January 2023, 2024 was when they said that they controlled Jabaliya. So this is the third time they're now going in, but they're not fully into Jabaliya. They're still, like I said, in Beit Hanoun. And they're promising this time, this is what they said in this Embeds article. They said previously, so the journalist asks, what about the captives? What about the captives? And the commander answers, that concerns us like it does everyone, but it isn't part of our operational considerations. We're exerting pressure to bring them back. That's our main vector. So it's not even in their goal of this to bring back captives, to look for them, to go down into tunnels. They're not doing any of that. They're just destroying the place. Um, yeah. And the commander says that it's difficult for us because the clearing the area, the combat is complicated. Any boy can decide to be a Hamas member. And this unit's been there for 3 months. Like I said, 90 days is the siege on the north. And they bragged about 7 kilometers of tunnels being removed, which, as we know, the Israelis claim that there's more than 1,000 kilometers of tunnels. So they're not going in tunnels. They're not fighting in tunnels. And Qassam is going to reconstitute in these areas afterwards. But the Israeli military explained the goal as just destruction. So if we look at number 12, actually, was there one more? Yeah, okay. There was one more newspaper article, but yeah, look, just to throw it in, no hostage deal in sight. IDF is depopulating the north of Gaza out of sheer inertia. So this is what the newspapers in Israel are reporting. Sheer inertia, genocide for inertia. just brutal. I just wanted to add that to it because it was the analysis beside the embed. And Army Radio explained to this. Army Radio explained the purpose of the operation. After three of their soldiers fell in Beit Hanoun in the past 24 hours, and after 53 have fallen in the past 3 months, what's the purpose of the operation? And the IDF said the operation is to allow people to return to the Gaza envelope, Israeli settlers to return to the Gaza envelope. This is not a raid operation. This is a maneuver, a ground maneuver for the purpose of completely destroying the enemy and all the infrastructure. To create a full occupation and cleansing operation, this takes time. So that's how the Israelis are seeing this right now. So if we look at number 12, 𝐤𝐿 still has the ability to fire rockets. They came out on New Year's and launched these. You can see that these are their larger 𝐤𝐿 rockets. These are Q-18s, the larger end of their the 𝐤𝐿 family of 𝐤𝐿 rockets. But of course, I'll show you in a minute. That's only the small end of their capabilities. And this is we still haven't got the best translation for it, but they're basically, the name of the launcher device is something like Iron Peace Enforcer. It's a play on words that's mocking the Iron Dome. And that sign says on day 453 of Operation Al-Aqsa Flood. And these were rockets that they fired on New Year's that rang in 2025, and that were part of I think it was like 12 days, the last count, that they've been firing rockets for 12 days long after Israel said that they had no capacity to do so. And yeah, here you go. Named after Sheikh Izzeddin al-Qassam, who was killed in the hills around Jenin in 1935, and whose death started the armed struggle, and the Great Revolt would follow in a few months after that. And you can see the rocket specs on there: 30-kilogram fragmentation warhead with 20-kilometer distance, and the Q-20's been in service since 2020. And if we look at the next slide, you can see these are the 𝐤𝐿 family of 𝐤𝐿 rockets. The Q-20 from 2012, the 𝐄𝐥𝐞 is 2020, 2018 is the one we saw. The Q-18 was founded in 2015, which we just saw there, and the Q-12 from 2022. And if we just go to the next slide, you can see where the 𝐤𝐿 rockets on the far left of the screen, that's the 𝐤𝐿 family. And then each of those rockets have their own other name, going all the way up to the Ayash 250, named after the engineer Yahya Ayash. And you can see the person on the right for size. A standard person is on the right hand side, so you can see the size of the rocket arsenal. And we haven't seen these in a while, so it'd be interesting to see if this is a new trend. But the rockets fired this week were more than we have seen of late, so it might be a statement. And it drove the Israelis crazy. If we look at number 15, tomorrow, the Israeli Army radio correspondent got really upset about this, about how they were firing rockets from Beit Hanoun. As soon as the Israelis entered Beit Hanoun, the Palestinians started firing rockets from Beit Hanoun right under their nose. But as you can see, it's right under their feet. They're hidden, buried rocket launchers. And the army moves in, because when the Israeli military moves in, they send in their local newspapers. They say, like, we're going into Beit Hanoun, and they hype it up as this, we're going to destroy the rockets. And then immediately 𝐓𝐴 𝐶𝐞 peels back the ground, sets the rocket launcher up, and fires literally from the area that the Israelis are occupying. They could fire these rockets. These rockets exist all over Gaza, but the purpose of it is to show the Israelis, as soon as they move into a new area, that it doesn't matter. They'll fire from right underneath their nose. So, they're using it as a messaging system to the Israelis. This is another messaging system from 𝐓𝐴 𝐶𝐞 in the next video. This is Soraya operation in Jabaliya, a return to sender operation. That's a in military terms, it's called a 155. It's a 155 millimeter artillery shell. And these are the shells that the Ukraine wants so badly and that Israel needed and that the Americans were trying to supply them. These are also the shells that the idiot politicians write on. Like when you see like Nikki Haley or, I mean, basically everybody does it when they go to Israel and they sign the shells that they fire. So this is interesting. Maybe one of these shells is signed by one of those idiot politicians, and now it's being used. It's being rewired, and it's being used against the Israelis. And that's what you're seeing here. The fighter travels across the ground and sets it in a building that the Israeli military is using and detonates it. So return to sender operation by 𝐓𝐴 𝐄𝐥𝐞𝐜 in Jabaliya in a booby-trapped house. Number of casualties in booby-trapped houses. Not clear if that's exactly what we're seeing there, but that was something that happened this week. So you can see him there. He's got the shell. That's the shell that they would write on the side, and they all smile while they're doing it. They fire them at Lebanon. In the 2006, I feel like the 2006 war was when that dumb craze began, where you sign they had little kids come from a school and sign them, and it's just very just reveals a lot about the Israelis. And now it's caught on, and you can see it happening everywhere. In any case, you can see the fighter there. He's in the circle. Two fighters move into that building. The Israelis are in the front of that building, and they wire it up and detonate it. And this video, this was turned around within 24 hours of the field report. So that's something that's interesting to note, that the comms network is still fully functioning despite the absolute devastation of Jabaliya. If we look at number 17 here, look at that destruction. It's just unbelievable. Here's a Merkava tank being hit by a barrel bomb. And then the fighters are going to wire up a Shawad, an EFP, and they're going to hit the reinforcements that come in after that. So that's what the fighter's doing here. He's wiring up that Shawad canister, and there's no shortage of those canisters. I don't anticipate them running out of those canisters, and those canisters can be refilled with unexploded ordnance. And they're devastating. There was an operation in Beit Hanoun that killed 3. And so then that's the reinforcements coming to the same spot as the previously targeted tank, and they get hit really hard. They get hit on the back end, which is the weakest point at the rear door, which is where the infantry cabin is, which has the soldiers. And it's also where the ammo storage is at the back of the tank. So that's a significant operation. This was one of 11 IEDs that targeted tanks in the last week since you last saw me. And this field report was also 24 hours before this video was launched. So it seems like their comms units are very sharp. At least 9 soldiers were killed this week in operations. And number 18 here, you're going to see a tandem 85 that we've pointed out before and explained. These belong to 𝐓𝐴 and 𝐓𝐴 only. I froze it there for you. You can see that they take an old stock anti-tank weapon RPG that no longer works against the thickness of a Merkava armor, and they add a second charge. They add that front nose to it, a precursor charge that will set off the reactive armor so that the second round can go inside. So if you strike right, it's effective. And the Israeli media reported four killed in a tank and 2 seriously wounded. So that's what happens when the tank gets penetrated by one of these rounds. It's not clear if it was the tandem 85 or a Yasin 105, which is a bit stronger. But they're penetrating these tanks. That's when you get these casualty reports. It's because the shape charge metal arrow dart enters inside the cabin of the tank, and it bounces around, and that's when you get 4 killed, 3 seriously wounded, because that's how many people. There's 8 people in the back of the tank, and you hit it. The other way to do it is the way that happened apparently overnight last night. And according to reporting in the Israeli media, 3 soldiers were killed from the 401st Armored Brigade and 3 seriously wounded in an IED operation that was so powerful, according to Israeli media, the turret of the tank was blown off the chassis of the tank. So what you're seeing there is a Merkava tank there, and yeah, you can imagine what it would be like if the turret was blown off. So, and then number 19 here, yeah, you can see a destroyed D9 armored bulldozer from Caterpillar lying in pieces in the streets of Jabaliya. So clearly, successful operations happening. That the Israelis would move that tank out. That means that you have fighters all around that battle space. There it is from the front. The D9 bulldozer destroyed. So I just, not surprisingly, Israel's lying. There is still fighters in Jabaliya. There are many fighters in Jabaliya, and we're seeing their operations carry out. A number of operations came through just after our production deadline, so there'll be many more for next week. And I wanted to just do a quick touch on the West Bank to wrap up the resistance report here, because the ferocious resistance, and also just because it's the first after the new year, this is 1,143 armed clashes in the West Bank. You can see that's Jenin in the north, 434. That's Tulkarm, 158. That's Nablus, 268. That's Tubas, 108. That's Qalqilia, 63. And then these ones get, I think that's Salfit and Ramallah, Bethlehem, Jericho, and Hebron. Maybe we can roll that one more time. But it gives you an idea of the north, because you're talking about, Abdul Jawad points it out too. Because whenever I was saying, this, any other time we would be calling this an intifada, and Abdul Jawad, I think, rightly said an intifada in the north of the West Bank. These numbers clearly show that 450, 150. So in the triangle of terror, as the British used to call it, in those top 4 ones, is the overwhelming majority of the operations. There's still operations in every other place. The bottom there, 40, that's Hebron. So just interesting to point that out, that these resistance operations are carrying on fiercely in the West Bank. This is the Jenin brigades, the engineering unit of the western front of the Jenin brigades, showing off their various sized IEDs. And we show them blowing up, but we don't often get to see them in their before they blow up. So when we're blowing up streets underneath streets, that's what they're doing. And they're various different sizes, different potencies, and different placements for them. The Jenin brigades showed us that. And of course, we're now more than a month into the siege of Jenin by the Palestinian Authority, that's being led by American Security Coordinator, Lieutenant General Michael Fenzel of the United States Army, who serves as the U.S. coordinator. And it's being framed by the Israelis and the U.S. Coordinator as make or break for the PA. And it's actually being said that for the PA too. A PA source told Haaretz that Jenin is an important fight for the PA and its security branches. It's a matter of to be or not to be. And the people who are opposed to Palestinian Authority security coordination, I think I will be hoping that it is a make or break, because it's going to break. It's not going to be successful. They're not going to be any more successful than the Israelis are in breaking the resistance. And it's just this camp-wide siege is now into its 3rd month. And the coming days, Tamara has a piece coming out following that I will hope that you guys will check out, and I will mention it on next week's show. There's just not very much coverage of that. So this is these operations now. This is in Tubas. This is an IED in Tubas against a convoy. And you're going to see here the MDT David towing one of the destroyed vehicles from Tubas. So you can see from Jenin the operation, the IEDs that Jenin showed, and then that's what it looks like when you just see the ball of flame. So to give you the before and after is an important thing to note. So that is the resistance report for this week.